what matters most. And it really brings together all three of those elements or areas of service for us. And as we said in our workshop overview, part of doing this work is really about starting with ourselves, right? Looking at what quality of life means to us specifically and how this might guide present or future decisions about how we are in the world, how we receive care, and how we eventually die. So before we go any further, I just wanted to pause here a moment and just kind of have us settle into this space. I know for a lot of us that are on the West Coast, it's 4:30 and we're probably coming from fairly busy days, a lot of activity and distractions. So just gonna ask that, you just sort of settle into you for a moment. And you can do this whether your eyes are open or closed, but just starting to have an awareness of what is happening for you physically, kind of feeling in. Are you feeling a sense of distraction or your attention being kind of pulled in a lot of directions? Maybe you're feeling a lot of presence right now. So just using your breath to sort of tune into what is going on for you right now. And is there anything that you can sort of tweak or just give a little love to bring you a bit more into this space? Knowing that what we are doing here isn't a tuning to self. So just kind of paying attention, to that for yourself throughout our time in the next, 55 minutes or so. And I would ask you to just consider when you hear the question, what matters most? From where do you feel activated to really answer that question? Does your head and the more cerebral self want to sort of jump in and provide answers? Or is there a way in which the heart might be allowed to respond? And just play with this awareness as well throughout this time. I bring this up just because for some of these deeper reflective spaces, oftentimes we find that the heart might produce for us more honest and revealing answers. And so that oftentimes requires a different type of listening. And, we recognize that this does need to be matched with more of a analytic and head-based approach as well. So we have this quote here by Katie Butler, who is a journalist. She's done extensive work on the systems and the personal realities surrounding end-of-life care in this country. And she says here in this quote, "There is a way to a peaceful, empowered death, even in an era of high technology medicine. It begins long before the final panicked trip to the emergency room." So that is what we are doing here today. And considering what matters to you, at the core of this is hopefully inherently empowering. Ideally knowing this in a clear-eyed way is the beginning and enduring guideposts that really informs all decisions related to your care as you are living and as you are a dying being. And, this may feel oversimplified to some of us, but the issue we note as death care workers is that if these personal and collective conversations don't really happen early on, we tend to lose ourselves to the complexities of a medical system that's not overly designed to really help you make decisions based on you. It does a lot of things well, as we all hopefully know, but there are questions about what is at the core of our life. We know that we can be taken for a lot of rides by the systems around us, and looking back, they maybe wouldn't be the things we necessarily would opt for. So by starting our workshop series from this place, with this question, what matters most, we're intentionally placing priority on this understanding that by doing these really important and life affirming inquiries now, you in all of your glory today, you're really able to set a variety of conversations and decisions and measures into place that hopefully provide more a sense of safety and care for yourself before or right as you're entering, you know, a more substantive engagement with the systems, the healthcare systems around you. So we just want to spend a bit of time looking at quality of life, just to kind of help us with this consideration. And we would love to hear from all of you, our participants here. So we're just going to have you, if you're moved and if something comes up for you, when you feel into quality of life for yourself in your own existence, what does a good day look like for you? And then the other question we have here is, what types of things do you do on a good day? And or another way of asking this would be, you know, where do you source meaning in your day-to-day life? So if people are willing, we'd love just to hear or see some comments come into the chat box related to these questions. And we'll just pause here for a sec. So what does a good day look like for you, or what types of things do you do on a good day, or where might you source meaning? So great, hearing from my children, moving my body. A good day, yoga, meditation, walking in nature. Time outside, connecting with friends, spending time in or on the water, being in nature with my wife. Coffee, getting outside, a good book, connecting and creating, improv theater. Great. Thank you all for being willing to share some of that. So I'm going to pass it over to Erin, who's going to share a bit more about some of our reflections just related to quality of life. And I will go on mute, Erin.
Thanks. Thanks, Elizabeth. So, you know, we asked that question, what does a good day look like for you? When we think about quality of life, we like to think about it as the most good days for the most days possible. And really, when we look at palliative care and even hospice care, that's one of the guiding principles, is how do we provide the highest quality of care, the most good days for someone for the most or as many days as they have remaining. And as you can see, as we saw in the chat box or heard in the chat box, quality of life and what a good day is really personal. We all have different interests. We all have different affinity for movement or for creativity. And I just wanted to share for a moment, there was a qualitative study published in the American Journal of Critical Care this month. And the authors interviewed 49 patients in an ICU. And what they found was that about 50% of the participants specifically mentioned either physical function or cognitive function, with an emphasis on the ability to communicate. That's how they defined quality of life. And when they were talking about what interventions they were willing to go through while in the ICU, survival was important, but it was qualified by, will I have my cognitive abilities? Will I have my physical function? And so this really can guide, this study was looking at, should these decisions be made in ICUs based on what a person defines as quality of life for them? Because the tendency is for acute care and in critical care to make decisions based on, how can we keep this person alive? How can we give this person a longer life? And the fact is that that might not be what somebody wants. One patient said, I don't really want to be sitting in a bed somewhere and somebody having to wash me and turn me. That is not a quality of life to me. So when you're thinking about what quality of life means to you, what a good day means to you, we're really going through a process of evaluating or examining. We're examining our values. We examine our individual, our personal, spiritual, and religious beliefs and what they might tell us about death and dying, or about what we believe is quality of life. They also inform how we live, how we make decisions. It's about examining your fears and worries about illness and dying. Worries about your family, perhaps, worries about your belongings. And then, as you saw in the example, or as you heard in the example from that study, your abilities, your physical function and your cognitive function. And the fact is that quality of life also has a lot of different arms. So once you've done that examination of all those things mentioned before, we look at the arms of what is quality of life in terms of your health. Maybe there's a quality of life in terms of your home or where you live. There's a quality of life in your relationships. There's a quality of life in the choices about your healthcare. Just like we said, will I be able to communicate? Will I be able to walk? And there's a quality of life in after death, right? A quality of life after life. And we'll explore that as well in a moment. So to start this exploration, we'll go to health. And Elizabeth is going to talk about some of those examinations around health and quality of life.
Great, thanks, Erin. So quality of life related to health, how we feel in our bodies, what we can do with our bodies and our minds. And so many of the examples here in the chat box point to that, right? That it's this yoga, movement, time and environments where I'm doing in a physical way things that bring me joy. So this is all, these considerations are all really about what's embodied reality and that which we're gifted as humans in our embodiedness. So it's really important, also to recognize that there really is this spectrum that we're playing with here as we move or age throughout our lives. And many of the world's religions or spiritual traditions address this and give us this blueprint to consider around what our slow walk through life might actually look like, knowing that our definitions connected to quality of life will shift and will meander, especially as it has to do with the body and our capacities there. So as we have here, when we're young, in that space, we naturally tend to be more active, more movement and freedom oriented, about independence. There's less of this awareness of what we can and can't do. And that's mostly because we're sort of in this, we can do most things. In this middle-aged, space, there's sort of this being able, so much of the focus is having the health to being able to do your work, to be in the world and in that sort of reliable, consistent way, stability, spending time with family. It's a lot of establishing yourself and in the space as well, there's this awareness starts to creep in about self-care, about making better decisions that might be related to the care of ourselves, the care of our bodies. And then when we go into that phase after that, slightly older, later life, the things that a lot of times we're focused on have to do with the enjoyment factor. If I want to move my body so I can travel, I can spend time outside, as some of these examples highlight, spending time with grandkids, maintaining independence and really using our time in ways that feel life-giving to us, and there's a sense of knowing and appreciating what we have, because we're starting to begin to see that things change and go away. And then in this illness and end of life window, some of the quality of life things related to body might be to feel pain-free, quality time with those that I love, enjoying food, fresh air, being at home, the feeling of being able to just be home, enjoyment in the comfort of a chair or bed that I love, or having a clear mind and decision-making capacity. And so we just go through all of this because being able to name and speak to quality of life considerations connected to health and mobility And our personal love and valuing of certain activities is so essential as we start to really think through the ins and outs of our own holistic advanced care planning for ourselves, no matter what age we are. You know, and there's this understanding that stage by stage and year by year, the hope is that we're consciously really integrating approaches that support a good quality of life, even as life starts to change and wind down. So the balance we strike and how and when we make these new decisions related to quality of life, you know, really is up to us. And that can start right now, which is what we're wanting to highlight. So I'll pass it back over to Erin, who's going to talk a bit about the quality of life just related to relationships.
Yeah, so I wanted to say that you'll hear us kind of interchangeably talking about quality of life and what matters most, right? The title of the workshop is What Matters Most. And that really is because that is kind of the defining characteristic of a quality of life in all these different ways. So talking about relationships, we're looking at who are your key people, who are the key people, the key relationships in your life, who matters most to you. And after you identify kind of who matters most to you, who you trust, who that key circle of people is or are, that's when we start to look at choosing a decision maker for our healthcare needs. And you'll see here, it says healthcare proxies on February 25th. That's the next step in this holistic advanced care planning. So we examine our values around these relationships. We examine what matters most in the relationships in our lives. And from that grounding, then we can look at choosing a healthcare proxy or a healthcare decision maker. And so if you come to that February one, we'll dive much deeper into that whole process. But as far as what matters most in your relationships, we want to find out, you know, what we're doing is finding out what needs more care today. Who needs more attention? And it's sometimes talked about as rugs. And you'll see here, rugs, the R is regrets. Are there regrets in your life that you could process, that you could think about, that maybe you need to write about them? Maybe you need to write to someone and express that regret. The U is unfinished business. You know, I've worked with patients who they were so close to dying, and because there was that one bill that was unpaid, and they knew it was coming in the mail, and they couldn't let go until they knew that bill was paid. Now that's a simplified unfinished business, but it's a simple example. There's much more beyond that. The G is for guilt. And again, this might be something where in a relationship, you have some guilt about something. And what could be really helpful to improve your quality of life is to address that guilt. And the same with shame. And the same with forgiveness, either extending forgiveness or asking forgiveness. And these all help us really become more tuned in to our emotional terrain. And then I'm going to shift kind of to our relationship with death and with dying. Some of you may be familiar with the Ars Moriendi, the Art of Dying. It's a medieval text written in the mid-1440s. It was a sort of death manual. And people were counseled not to fight bodily death by medical means, but to spend their time caring for their soul. There were prayers, there were instructions about a lot of the stuff we just talked about making amends, about saying you're sorry, about making prayers and making wishes for what's to come. And you can see in the picture that they didn't say it was that death would be blissful, that you would face your angels and your demons. And so really it's about tending to your soul and doing that soul caring or soul tending way before you're on your deathbed. And that's what this process of holistic advanced care planning, of talking about what matters most writing about what matters most, that is the tending to your soul. And the Ars Moriendi has actually kind of made a renaissance recently. There's a lot of articles about different people in medicine and in spiritual care kind of reviving this idea, which is real similar to what we're doing in a way. In the New England Journal of Medicine, they described that this came out on the heels of the bubonic plague, and it was really to provide a practical and spiritual framework for the preparation for death. And just in this article in the New England Journal of Medicine, the author, Kathleen McKenzie, shared this really lovely story about her father. And he was a rancher in Colorado, and he lived on this 3,300 acre ranch. And, you know, he always wore his cowboy hat and his cowboy boots. And he just really loved being on his ranch. And he loved the house where he had this big dining table that looked out over the land. And he had, until recently, until this article was written, he had tended to that land. So even in advanced age. And then in a few years, or in the year prior, he had had some medical things. He refused to go to the hospital until finally he had a stroke and had to be taken to the hospital. And she talks about going to the hospital and tending to him and being there when he died. And what she said was that in the year that had passed, I had been thankful to my dad for his foresight in preparing himself and his family for the kind of death he wanted. It was a challenge to resist the medical treatment I knew so well. But in honoring his wishes, we shifted our focus from life-prolonging technology to life-enriching community. And we managed to apply 15th century principles to achieve a timeless outcome, a good death. And, you know, we talk about it more as a fitting death, and it just seemed that that was a fitting death for him. They were able to bring him home from the ICU and allow him to die on his ranch. And so that was what mattered most to him, and he took the time to write it down. And that's what this is about. So the next kind of aspect is that there are choices in where you would like to die, who you would want to be there, what level of care matters to you, what matters most for your body after death, for the celebration of your life. And it seems, I know, like we're kind of selling all of our later workshops, but we just want you to know kind of what's coming if you're interested in this series. This is what we'll go into more in March, is talking about these end-of-life options. What are the care options? What are your choices around dying? And what are your choices after death? You know, like some of the post-death care. What are burial and cremation options? Remembrance options? What kind of care can you have? Hospice care and palliative care in the home, or maybe choosing to die on your 3,300 acre ranch. We'll talk about home funerals, because before funeral homes, there was a home funeral. And it's also made a renaissance, having that care at home. So that's what we'll go into when we get to March. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to send it back to Elizabeth for our next section.
Thank you, Erin. So much of this contemplation that we're talking about is really rooted in this understanding of the importance of self and collective education. You know, this recognition that there is so much that we ourselves have not contemplated about what matters most. And, you know, I think a lot of times we feel like, oh, I am aware of that, or I would know how to say that. But when you sit down with these questions in front of you, you know, I think I have found for myself in many senses, it's a lot harder to even articulate sort of from a variety of angles, what is it that what matters to me now, and what would matter to me in this scenario, this scenario, this scenario. And so we find that it does take giving a lot of focus and energy and love to this process, which is why we intentionally start with this question and this focus of what matters most. And connected to this is this understanding of death literacy. We use that term a lot, but it's this piece of becoming self and system-wise educated around how we can really follow through with and adhere to and respect when someone says, this is what matters most to me. How do we do that? So I'd say it's really about building both our knowledge and this current time awareness around what we value in our lives, what brings us joy and quality in our day-to-day lived experiences. It's about really getting clear-eyed about this so we know what we might do differently if these things were not possible, if and when inevitably life will change, our quality of life will change. And part of this knowledge building is really about becoming familiar with our living and our dying rights, because of all the good and positive things in life, like advanced medical technology, the fact that people are living longer, we're now also part of this, what I would call like a putting off culture. And part of what that means is that we have not had to really empower ourselves in a lot of senses with these self-conversations, as well as with sort of empowering ourselves with the tangible information that helps us to be more death literate, more life literate, and more death literate. And so starting with this inquiry of what matters most, ideally then prompts us to become familiar with our healthcare rights and our dying rights and our post-death rights. And it matters that we are reflected in the decisions that are made, that we are reflected at the center of our decisions based on who we are and what we love in the world. And, I'm sure we all have these experiences. I can't tell you how many experiences I can point to personally or that others have shared with me around, if I only would have known that they wanted this, or if I only would have known this meant so much to them, if we only had had this conversation, we would not have convinced them to do that last round of experimental medication. I would have brought my dead son back to the house for a vigil. I didn't know that was possible. I would have had them buried there. I would have done this and this differently. And that matters because of the sense of how are we reflecting the life that they lived and loved, for ourselves and others as we age. And so ideally looking at what matters most now really gives us, more of a dynamic roadmap for all the experiences and the decisions to come. It won't necessarily be perfect. It's not foolproof, but this is why we really want to elevate and start with this workshop series, pointing to the importance of this really reflective work. So on the next slide here, we just wanted to highlight a really useful document that was created recently. It's a free workbook that's called What Matters to Me. And I will put here in the chat box the link to access a free download of this workbook. It was created in kind of a collaborative endeavor between the Conversation Project, which I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, and Ariadne Labs. And at the core, when you start to look at it, or you can see at the bottom there, it says a guide to serious illness conversations. So part of how it was sort of envisioned or created or articulated was that people who had newer knowledge of a serious illness could sit down and look through this document and use this as a guide for conversations with care providers and with people around them, getting clear-eyed in your own experience. And I have it here in my hands. As Erin and I have worked through this workbook, we've really found that there is an appropriateness and an angle to how these questions are asked that really apply to this process, whether somebody actually has a serious illness, or someone that, you know, is just in this reflective space of what really matters most. So for those that are interested, you know, as you go through it, there's questions that may feel a little bit more directed to, you know, what is your understanding of your current health situation, as if somebody maybe has a advanced or a serious illness. But we would say the majority of the questions in here are you know, general enough that would really suggest, if you are moved, this is a really great spot to start some of this reflective work. There's been a lot of thought and research and intentionality into the creation of this document, and like we said, it's free. So feel free to download it if you're moved, and start working off of this. And then Erin, do you want to say anything else about the actual document there, about the what matters to me?
I would just say, you know, it evolved. The Conversation Project, they've got a lot of different guides, and we use a lot of them for guiding our workshops and guiding our work. And this was one that came out of a lot of research they did in figuring out why what matters most, what matters to you, really is the starting point for those conversations with your physician. So like Elizabeth said, a lot of the questions are great starting points for journaling for yourself if you're healthy. And if you or somebody you know has a serious illness and you're getting ready to talk to a physician, having that starting point so that you know when you're talking about the treatments that could be offered, or procedures that could be offered, that you know how to ask the question, well, what will this do for me? Because here's what really matters. Will this get me to that point? Will this ensure that quality of life for me? Or is this not really that going to make a big difference? And so it really helps guide those treatment decisions as well, and gives you more empowerment in talking with a physician about what your treatment course, what your prognosis looks like. So that was really what inspired us to then kind of translate or simmer that down for healthy people as well.
Thanks, Erin. And then you'll see we just noted here on the right side of the screen, and we are not trying to sell our offerings. They're actually free. So we just wanted to highlight that there is an intentionality to the progression of this 4-part series, starting with this what matters most, going into the, you know, the healthcare representative or proxy, and all the considerations involved in that, in a very relationship based, into end of life choices and what you might integrate into some of, you know, what you want to document. And then on April 16th is our final offering, which will be focused more on you know, the creation of documents that really articulate what matters most to you in the form of an advance directive. So on the next slide, you know, to sort of summarize, we wanted to share another quote from Katie Butler, who we started off highlighting, which this quote comes from extensive research that she has done around our care systems. And she says, people who are willing to contemplate their aging, vulnerability, and mortality often live better lives in old age and illness, and experience better deaths than those who don't. You know, and the first time I read this, I thought, wow, that thing that we've grown up with, or that we've heard about, you know, I'm going to jinx it. If I talk too much about death, somehow it's going to impact, you know, the trajectory of my life, or what the end of my life looks like. And this quote unto itself, you know, really highlights something opposite, that the willingness and, you know, when you recognize the courage to really contemplate our aging and our vulnerability and mortality, means that, you know, and research points to this, that people often live better lives in old age and illness, because we know what matters in a different way. And so that's what we're really talking about, you know, walking the walk, really starting with this well thought out articulation of what matters most to us right now. You know, not getting distracted by everything that's happening in terms of health conversations or what's possible, or you know, what the doctor is saying, but what matters to us right now in the glory of us. And from there, you know, as that starting point, we're then empowered to do all the other elements that are asked of us in this holistic advanced care planning process. This informs who we choose as our healthcare representatives. It informs what we communicate to loved ones in regard to our experiences, you know, what conversations need to happen. And it informs when and how we document these wishes and preferences in an advance directive and other documents that might support all of this. So, you know, it culminates in this holistic and hopefully quality end of life planning, which is about honoring yourself and your wishes and your relationships, the things that really do matter to you. So we started, which is to express gratitude for you noting our work in the world and showing up. You know, it feels like this work that we do is about us, and it is about all of us, right? It's about our hearts, and it's about the sort of death literacy awareness that reverberates into the world, the way that we show up for the community around us, our loved ones, and those that, you know, are in our faith communities, our work communities, and beyond. So thank you. As Sheila Merle noted, you know, we can be aware of this content over and over again, and it takes a certain courage to show up to these conversations to begin with. And, you know, that sense of, for me, Sheila Merle, I've, you know, been in this for years and years, and I start thinking, oh my gosh, I should redo my advance directive, and then, you know, there's always a putting off. There's something else to do. So the fact that you're all here today with us is exceptional, and we are grateful for that. We have on the slide here our website. If there are any questions or issues with reaching out or registering for the workshop, please email us at that info@thepeacefulpresenceproject.org. And we are making these workshops free of charge because we want to get this work and this information out into the world. We're also reliant as a nonprofit on the generous support of community members and people in the world that value the work that we do. So if you are moved to do any sort of donating to us now or in the future, I'll just put a link to our page there in the chat box as well. Again, absolutely no pressure. Erin and I and the rest of our team open these offerings up with only open-hearted gratitude for people in the world that even want to pay attention to this work alongside of us. We feel like it takes a community to be here in the first place. So thank you so much for signing up, and we hope to see you in future offerings, the February, March, or April events. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all so much for being here. We appreciate you and look forward to seeing you again sometime soon. Have a really